Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Martin, founder of gaswork.com. Thank you for attending this second installment of the career-focused webinar series that's co-hosted by Somnia Anesthesia and gaswork.com. Today our discussion will focus on the anesthesia clinical leader and address the topic from two perspectives. First, that of the current clinical anesthesia leader, and second, that of the aspiring clinical anesthesia leader. Also, all registrants will be emailed a recording of today's presentation by the end of the week. Next slide. Joining us today is Dr. Roy Winston, Chief of Anesthesia at Kauai Delta Medical Center in Visalia, California, and Marina Ring, Chief Operating Officer of Somnia Anesthesia. Dr. Winston has over 20 years of clinical anesthesia experience. Prior to joining Kauai Delta, Dr. Winston served as Associate Director of Anesthesiology in New York at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx, and as Interim Chief of Anesthesia at Memorial Healthcare in Owasso, Michigan. Earlier in his career, Dr. Winston served as Medical Director and Chief of Anesthesiology at Sierra Surgical Center in Rancho Mirage, California, and as Director of Critical Care Medicine and Anesthesiology at Peachtree Regional Hospital in Newnan, Georgia, and as Clinical Director and Assistant Professor at Emory University School of Medicine in Atlanta and the University of California at Irvine. Dr. Winston served 9 years in the United States Navy Reserve, achieving the rank of Lieutenant Commander. He also served on 3 Space Shuttle critical support teams for NASA as a flight surgeon and participated in the care teams for 2 U.S. presidents. Marina Ring, as Somnia's Chief Operating Officer, oversees numerous administrative and operational functions, including human resources, clinical and corporate recruitment, facility operations, and information technology departments. She has 18 years of experience in human resources and organizational administration, which she earned at a variety of global firms, including J.P. Morgan, Net Incentives, 3i Group, and Bear Stearns Asset Management. Next slide. Before I hand it over to Roy, here's a quick rundown of today's agenda. First, we'll dissect what's involved with being an anesthesia leader from the perspective of a current chief. We'll also discuss some of the tricks of the trade and best practices to utilize. For those aspiring leaders, we'll first touch base with what it takes to be an anesthesia leader, highlighting how to get there and what you'll need to do to be prepared. Then we're going to announce the winner of the Somnia's 2013 CRNA of the Year contest. Finally, we'll wrap up with a question and answer session, which is available to all attendees by submitting a question via the webinar screen on the top right. Next slide. Now, without further ado, here's Dr. Roy Winston, Chief of Anesthesiology at Kauai Delta Medical Center, who will discuss the day-to-day challenges a current anesthesia leader encounters. Roy?
Thanks very much, Dr. Martin. Appreciate the warm introduction. I'd like to first welcome everybody to this webinar, and I will try to keep my remarks pertinent to the point and not run too long. So as Dr. Martin said, I'm currently Chief of Anesthesia at Kauai Delta Medical Center, and that's located in Visalia, California. We're approximately a just under 600-bed hospital, and if I could have the next slide, please. And we do a large volume of orthopedics, OBGYN, general surgery, urology, spine, and cardiac as well. We have 18 operating rooms. We usually run about 16 anesthetizing locations during the week. And probably the most significant thing about our practice, it was an all-MD practice up till approximately 1.5 years ago, and then we transitioned to the anesthesia care team model with CRNA nurse anesthetists and MD anesthesiologists working in a collaborative environment. We also do some teaching of medical students. We don't have our own residency program, but we do have rotators from other specialties. And I think the day-to-day challenge in anesthesia is always the responsible managing of the staff and the volume and the workflow of the day. And I'll get more into that in a minute. If I could have the next slide, please. I think for me, the single biggest thing I see in anesthesia is anesthesiologists in general rise to a certain level where they run departments and groups, and then they wind up doing very little, if any, clinical work. I know it's commonplace, chairman at different academic practices don't set foot in the operating room anymore. And I think that we're really one of the only specialties that sees that happening in a large way. Surgeons who are chiefs of surgery and other department heads stay clinical, and are always looked at as leaders in the clinical end of their department. So I think leading a department from the front, being a clinical worker, taking some call, being able to see all phases of the operating room and the clinical environment that you work in, I think is very important. And I think it's very easy to step out of that role and then kind of become stale and lose touch with what's going on. And I think that leading by example allows you to set the standard and the benchmark, if you will, for the rest of your group. And I think that's very important. And being a clinical resource just increases the buy-in from all the other groups, if you will, and I think that's very important. The biggest challenge it presents really is a time and resource management. Obviously, you have a limited amount of time, and a lot of the important meetings and conferences in the hospital go on during the day. So there's plenty of times where you'll have to step out of the operating room to attend things like medical executive committee, pharmacy and therapeutics, do root cause analysis meetings, all kinds of things that come up and challenge your time commitment. I think that's really one of the hardest things. Next slide, please. I think one of the other challenges we're facing in this current environment is maximizing your coverage efficiency and doing that through staffing model adaptation. And I think staffing models are not a static thing. It's not once you've worked out a staffing model, that's just the way it's going to be. You have to look at changes, and we're forever changing. You know, we add some block time, we add some open time, how we're going to cover new locations. And in anesthesia, we're frequently challenged. You know, we do anesthesia in GI labs and radiation oncology, sometimes in the ER in critical situations. And I think being able to maximize your coverage is a very important thing, and how you use your people in that way. And I'll get more to that in a minute, but I think also growing department heads and leaders. So if you have someone who's an expert in OB or pediatrics, being able to use them to help mentor your team and make sure that you stay current and with best practice across the board whenever possible. Next slide, please. Well, one of the most important things is going to be developing your relationships throughout the hospital. And I think the first place that relationships are so important is with the hospital executive team. We find that over the years, we've always been taught to fear the hospital executives, you know, stay away from the COOs and the CEOs and all that, because it's nothing but trouble. But really, in the changing environment we have these days, our goals and the hospital goals are pretty much aligned. And being able to work together to achieve those goals is really going to make things important. And you'd be surprised, too, having a hospital administrator that's always in the loop on what's going on can also help with any problems that arise and so on. And, you know, it's the old adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And not to say that they're enemies, but they oftentimes hold the power of the contract over you, and it's just a good relationship to have, be strong. Transparency, you know, that's the new word, I think, of this decade in healthcare. Obama just said that he's going to try to have more transparency in our intelligence services while keeping national security items well protected. Well, I think that's a hard job in intelligence. But in what we do, transparency, I think, is much easier. And I think transparency, it's across the board. It's transparency in patient care. It's transparency in job descriptions. It's transparency in how people are evaluated and HR issues that come up, and being clear and open and honest and direct at times, much more so than you're used to, I think. I think that's important, and I believe that's one of the cornerstones to having a team that will respect you and will follow you. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I gained being a chief at a Somnia institution is I have a whole level of national support behind me. On site, I have an administrator who handles my day-to-day issues, manages to make sure that our accounts receivable are managed in the right way, make sure that our process improvement programs and QA is being done, things like OPPE and all that, evaluation of clinicians. The on-site administrator is key to managing so many facets of the practice, but way beyond them, I have the national support from Somnia, which gives me help with things like credentialing, you know, and credentialing these days is not like it was when I started practicing a little over 20 years ago, where you fill out a few forms and in 24 hours you have privileges some places. Now you need primary source verification from pretty much every place you've been since kindergarten. You know, it's about getting a security clearance. They talk to everybody along the way, and they make sure that there's no skeletons in the closet, if you will. Quality assurance and process improvement programs. You know, I remember as a resident, you know, you kind of laughed at some of those things that they were just coming into being in the mid to late 80s. And now really they're a great tool for practice because, you know, let's face it, if we don't deal with our own process improvement, our own quality assurance, we're going to have a governmental arm doing that for us very, very quickly. And I think that maintaining a good process improvement program and quality assurance program assures that you're able to strive for best practice and, you know, gives you benchmarkable data that you can follow and work with. AR management, as I mentioned, you know, a very, very big part of practice for any of us because if you're not getting paid for what you're doing and the money isn't being collected efficiently, it's really going to be trouble. And these days, you know, the issues of when a provider overpays you and you're not refunded promptly and those things aren't done, there's serious fines and issues that come up. So AR management is a whole specialty that really has become much more sophisticated over time. Recruitment, that goes along with credentialing. Being able to recruit the right people for the right places. And that's something that I just came through in the startup where with our case volume we have about 9 MDs and about 18 CRNAs. And going from 0 CRNAs to 18 CRNAs really was a monumental task to accomplish quickly. And having a recruitment department that can get leads, work with the results that you get from places like gas work, which I think is, you know, it's really the resource in anesthesiology these days and for CRNAs as well. And I think be able to get those people, sort through them, see who would be fit your job description and who wouldn't, and see who you want to move into the next process of interviewing and so on. Recruitment is really a very busy thing. And I know if any of you have placed any ads or done things, you can get hundreds and hundreds of responses sometimes. And, you know, really, and you're looking for 2 or 3 good ones, it's a challenge. We also at Somnia have a medical advisory board. And what that is, it's our senior clinicians, mostly the chiefs and a few other people from our various locations around the country get together on a regular basis to discuss clinical and regulatory challenges that we all face. These days with the kind of moving mark that CMS gives us and Joint Commission, as well as, like I said, challenges with AR and billing and the rest of that, and all the pieces that go together, we get distracted from sometimes our primary mission, which really is to take care of patients. So the Medical Advisory Board makes sure that our clinical care and the rest of that allows us to do best practice, and it ties everything together really. We also have annual leadership meetings once a year where all the chiefs and associate chiefs and chief CRNAs from the various locations get together, and we go over several days worth of everything from having guest lecturers talk on a variety of interesting topics to dealing with a lot of the details that show up as you kind of drill down into the weeds of your practice. We have quarterly clinical calls where the administrators and clinical people can get together and go over things which affect us on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, and strategic planning wise. And you don't always see these people. They're kind of behind the scenes at the practice, but it gives you just such a competitive edge in being able to deal with all the issues that come up in a practice outside of just the clinical work. Next slide, please. So when we're building and enhancing these interpersonal relationships, where do we start? Well, I have patients listed first just because patients are, you know, what we're about. But really, your relationship with your patients, I think I don't need to spend any time on with any competent provider with that. I think we all do that well, and we know what we have to do with that. The administration I mentioned, I think it's so important to be able to maintain a close administration relationship and being able to call on them when you need help and have them run interference for you when you need them, and keeping them in the loop, being transparent with them, like I said, super important. Surgeons, clearly, you know, it's hard to say who our primary person is after the patients. Is it the administration? Is it the surgeons? Because if the surgeons aren't happy, it's really not going to work out well where you are. And to make a surgeon happy, you know, you have to have an infinite number of 7:30 a.m. starts and empty rooms waiting for them for the instant they need it, and 24/7. So blending what's really realistic in terms of availability, staffing, and so on to what the needs and wants of the surgeons are sometimes can be a difficult challenge. But I think when you can explain things in ways that people understand the resources you have and how they have to be matched, I think it really makes for a quality deliverable service. Nursing staff, you know, they are the cornerstone in the operating rooms. If you can't make things work with your nursing staff, or you have problems, it can be just a dreadful time for everybody involved, because the nurses put the brakes on. That's it. There go your turnover time. There go the on-time starts and the rest of the things we look at. The medical staff as a whole, there's got to be good communication with the rest of your medical staff, so that when the patient shows up and needs a renal, GI, cardiac consultation, or you have to reach somebody, you have the availability to do that, and you can depend on your consultative services. And these days, as places go to more and more hospitalists, you find that there are really in-house people available to you 24/7, and using your medical staff and using those that can help you and establish those relationships early, I think is very important. Next slide, please. Well, one of the things you have to do from time to time is look back at yourself and your staff. It's very easy always to figure out it's somebody else's fault or issue when things aren't moving how you want them to, but oftentimes we have to do some reevaluation and make some changes ourselves, which I think is very important. Being with a large institution, I have benchmarks from my other similar hospitals, and there also are other kinds of benchmarks you can get these days from the ASA and so on as a resource. And I think it's very important to judge yourself against what's going on out there, because that's really what lets you know, hey, am I doing the right thing? And yeah, maybe you're meeting all the skip stuff and getting your antibiotics and your beta blocker and all that stuff done, but are you really doing things as far as on time starts, making your OB patients happy, keeping the surgeons where they need to be? We run patient and surgeon satisfaction surveys on a regular basis. We try to reach out to every patient. We have a service that does it, that calls them about a week after their anesthetic, and surveys them as to their experience. And so we can, by generating responses to these questions and looking at them over time, we can see how we're doing, and we can even see how individual physicians affect the patient's responses, which I think is an important thing. You know, and in these days, there's lots of searchable data online, and I wouldn't be surprised within the next 5 years as you'll be able to pull up individual providers and what their satisfaction rating is determined by some government agency, such as, HCAP scores and so on. And I think it's coming. If it's not coming in the next few years, it'll be here probably sooner than anybody wants. But at the end of the day, I think having best practice patient-centric care is how we're going to be judged. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what are the things that we do in being able to do this? Well, we look at all the regulatory things like the skip measures, which I'm sure everybody's tired of at this point, but they're so important because now it goes into not just being bonus paid, but starting in 2014, it's going to be actual subtraction of payment if you don't meet those things. CMS conditions of participation. As the chief of anesthesia, you're responsible for anesthesia anywhere that is delivered in the hospital, even if you're not doing it. So whatever the cardiac cath lab is doing or the GI lab, without you even involved, you're still overall responsible for anesthesia throughout the hospital in terms of their conditions of participation. So having a policy to deal with that and ways of educating physicians so you don't have morbidities and issues that come up, I think is very important. Accreditation survey success. It's really hard these days to hit all the points that they go through. So having a national organization that specializes in that and is there as a resource, can help you with mock surveys and so on, so you're really prepared, I think makes a big difference. Patient satisfaction I touched on already, but it's so important, particularly for the obstetrical patients and the surgical patients. And it's always amazing. We get our epidurals started usually within about 15 minutes of the first call, and I think obstetrical patients want that done within the first 15 seconds, and making sure expectations are met is sometimes tough. Adverse event rates. We're responsible for maintaining those rates ourselves, and again, comparing them by provider to different and various benchmarks, so we can make sure for our types of patients we're within the realm of best practices, which is what we're obviously shooting for. And these days, most hospitals are tracking turnover times, first case on time starts, cancellations due to anesthesia, and delays due to anesthesia. So making sure you keep your own house clean and in order and strive to make these things not be an issue takes a lot of work. Next slide, please. I hope this you can see this well, but it talks about the patient and the surgeon satisfaction surveys. We try to keep them short. Sometimes the attention span of the surgeon's not going to fill out a 100-question thing, but we find that somewhere between 8 and 12 questions is a good number of questions that you can get answered. And we find we usually get about a third of our surgeons responding to the survey, and that's a pretty big sampling, especially since some of our surgeons still aren't on email, which I always find interesting. Next slide, please. Well, I think one of the more important things in anesthesia is attitude, and I have a lot of situations in the hospital where they have to call whoever's running the floor for that day to add certain types of cases on or do certain things. And I always like to say we're in the business of saying yes in anesthesia, because if you're always saying no, you're not going to get too far in the hospital and with patient care. But you have to say yes within certain parameters, and you have to make sure that whatever needs to be done is done correctly and with best practice in mind. And I think that's important. Staying several steps ahead, it's like in a chess game. If you're just thinking about the move you're making now, you've already lost. If you can't plan 3, 4, 5, 6 moves ahead, you're going to have a miserable time trying to lead a department and get them to a place without thinking about that ahead of time. The other piece, which I mentioned at the beginning, is growing your leadership team. Find skills in your members and help them evolve into better clinicians and better leaders, be able to sit on and run different committees in the hospital. It's so important for us as anesthesiologists to have a broad penetrance in hospital committees so we have a voice. It's the same as voting in any election. If you're not on the hospital committees and you don't show up at the hospital committees, your voice will be lost and things will get passed that will be rammed down your throat and so on without having had a chance to discuss it or change them, which I think is important. Staying abreast of things with conferences and events and education at sites is important as well, and you never just want to kind of sit there in your own silo and not grow. I think that can be a problem as well. And I think it's also it's important to have a few areas, not too many, but a few that you can concentrate on a rotating basis. Things like we're doing a performance improvement project now looking at our adverse event rates, not only in the operating room but in the PACU as well, and we're letting the PACU nurses drive that because we feel that they're a better reporter of adverse events. We as anesthesiologists, I think, probably underreport because nobody wants to self-report, even though the purpose of the system is to prevent others from reporting it, and it's done under the auspices of QAPI, so there's no repercussions. I think we do underreport, and that's a bad thing. Next slide, please. So developing every employee in your group and finding the skill sets that they have that can put them and let them own certain parts of what you do, I think is important. Dealing with problems immediately, and sometimes when I say deal immediately, it takes patience to do it immediately, and by that I mean I've had several situations where I have a problem and I wait a day or two to address it because I let it cool off so you're not dealing with it when tempers are high and so on. I had an OB surgeon and a OB anesthetist get into it recently where it spilled out into the hallway and patients heard and yelling and screaming, and I think dealing with that right when it happened would have been a mistake because the tempers were too high. And afterwards, by the time they go home and think about it, they both feel bad, and it's much easier to kind of reach a common place and get them back on the tracks they need to if you take your time. So you want to act and not react in those situations. And again, leading from the front, having that clinical buy-in and leadership where they see you're the one setting the standard, it'll help pull people along, I think, that way. And remembering where you came from and being humble about it, I think, is a piece as well. And make sure you just keep learning, keep improving, and keep trying new things. At this point, next slide, please, I'd like to leave you with a little quote from Martin Luther King where he says, "A genuine leader doesn't reflect consensus, he molds consensus." And I think that's so important because if you sit there trying to get a consensus from your group or a consensus of surgeons, you're going to have as many different opinions as you have providers. And I think you have to figure out what the consensus is that you want and then mold those to follow your consensus. And that's really what true leadership is. It's not, we may live in a democratic society, but in the corporate world, and which I think medicine is these days, it's not one man, one vote. It really needs to be a leader that leads his group on to newer and better things. Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marina Ring, who's the Chief Operating Officer over at Somnia.
Thank you, Roy. That was great, and it's really a pleasure to work with you. I think some of my information today will be similar to what you discussed, but maybe in a little bit more of a general format. I love quotes, so I'm going to start with one as well. And I think this is from the great leadership guru, Jack Welch, from General Electric, and before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself. when you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And I think that's a really important distinction. As everyone knows, there's been significant research, information, views on leadership and the value of leadership. Areas of focus have expanded from just publications to academic and specific leadership programs, and to virtually a heavy focus in every segment of government and business, including the military, the private sector, as well as healthcare and healthcare management organizations. Most, if not all, organizations develop and implement their strategy and their tactical initiatives and objectives based on a leadership either first to market, a place where they're most effective in terms of their company focus, as well as their prioritization, and always focus on the capabilities and strengths of their actual leadership and their leadership team. Next slide, please. For the purpose of the seminar, we took a look at what is leadership. And when we went to do some research for preparation, we found literally hundreds of definitions out in the markets, maybe thousands. And what we focused on is something what we thought was relevant and simple by Stephen Covey, who's the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that is leadership is communicating to people their worth and potential so clearly that they can come to see it in themselves. My view is, as a leader, and part of that success is really being able to wear multiple hats at the same time and being able to successfully switch from role to role based on whatever the situation is at hand. I think first and foremost, as a leader, though, you need to garner credibility, and that means being a technical expert in your field. Understanding key aspects of your positions, including strong skills and effective use of judgment. In addition to being viewed as a technical expert, you'll need to model and set the standard for various key behaviors. You'll serve many hats: a coach, a mentor and advisor, a colleague, friend, and manager and counselor. You'll definitely educate, and part of it will be effectively resolving conflict, being able to be that point of escalation, and really being responsible for the circle of trust that you create on your team. Next slide, please. We also took a look at the standard requirements for clinical leadership positions in the market. And when we looked at the macro market, we realized that the requirements were so varied and very specific to each opportunities in terms of clinical requirements, practice setting, location, the related rewards and recognition. At minimum, though, all the clinical positions had the following requirements: education, certification, board certification, active licenses, multiple licenses, and ACLS and PAL certifications. The practice settings really drove a lot of the requirements in terms of whether the opportunities were academic, in an ambulatory setting, a hospital working for a large system, a management company, or a business rather than a clinically focused opportunity. And there were other areas of focus, but a lot looked for longevity in positions, prior leadership experience, working across a multitude of departments, the ability to build relationships and set a culture, and most importantly, or as importantly, change management. Have the leaders really serve as a change agent for the organization. Next slide, please. The core requirements critical for success on the soft skills side were the ability to develop and implement a vision, set a strategy, effective and strong communication skills, being flexible and organized, having integrity in the work, again, the ability to build and maintain relationships, the art of persuasion both at an individual level as well as a team level, being adept and adaptable, teamwork, developing your team, being able to make decisions and applying judgment, planning and executing on plans, and the ability to handle conflict were all very important. Because the responsibilities were so varied and so specific to the opportunities, we took a look internally within Somnia to get a background sense of some of our most recent chief hires. Of the few last hires, all had over 20 years of clinical experience. The backgrounds included participation on various executive committees, previous positions as chiefs and directors of various specialties, including directors of special care units, unit leaders for vascular anesthesia, and of this group, all also had academic leadership position. At Somnia, when we look for leaders, we really focus on expanded skill set and relevant expertise. We always look to our leaders to support and enhance each of the facilities and add value across our organization. One of the things that we focus on, and is an included requirement for the role, is the ability to create, disseminate, and implement anesthesia policies, procedures, and protocols. We look to our leaders to support and enhance a systematic approach of clinical care in their environment and provide input and advice in all areas related to care, including that of equipment, supply, and other logistical issues. We also focus on the ability to manage postoperative care in accordance with national accreditation standards, assist and enhance anesthesia discharge standards and instructions, support effective management of room turnover, as Roy mentioned, in preparation towards achieving high quality in anesthesia results, manage incidents and complications as they arise, and really effectively escalate the various issues, resolve team-related issues and concerns, and be in that position to really provide comprehensive feedback to their teams on a regular and consistent basis, and again, effectively leverage team skill sets and optimize coverage and scheduling requirements. Next slide, please. I think participation in the facility and in the community is also very important. We look for our chiefs to participate in committees and boards that impact the clinical care and really get to know and understand what other meetings are appropriate for those partnerships. Assist and serve as a resource for the department when dealing with healthcare and state regulators and other third parties, and really act as that interface between anesthesia departments and the rest of the departments at the hospital, not limited to OR, hospital administration, surgeons, and always patients. Oversee and contribute to the quality efforts, as we already mentioned. Get involved in what's happening in the local community and those boards, and really understand and know their practice, understand the practice detail, participate, and contribute to the overall results. Next slide, please. What to consider? What are the kinds of questions you would ask yourself? Are you ready? How do you prepare? What type of leadership position are you looking for? Where are those opportunities? What's the associated reward and recognition commensurate with the additional responsibilities? What the specific responsibilities are in the new role? And what do I do next? Next slide. Am I ready to be a clinical leader? I think a lot of it is really you are always responsible for your career, and taking that initiative and seeking out additional responsibilities is critical to that success. Begin gaining leadership skills in your current role. You can do that in many ways. Provide support on scheduling, participate in appropriate committees, really think through with your mentor and coach, if they're on site, about how to offload some of those responsibilities from the existing team, provide support on policy and procedure, metrics and reporting, as well as get involved with conflict resolution when appropriate. Seek out that mentor actively. That could be somebody within or outside of your workplace, and I think it's really important to walk the talk. Conscientiously develop those leadership competencies and be responsible for initiating your career path. Networking is always key regardless of where you are in your career, and make sure you understand, solicit, and do something with the feedback that you're getting from the leaders in your organization. Next slide, please. The types of leadership opportunities. There are many directions that you could take in a leadership role. Research and understand what those areas are and what those related requirements are. And just because you start in one area doesn't mean you end up there, or you can't take on other various different take off in other various different directions. There are opportunities in non-clinical settings. You can do instruction, assistant professorships, or anesthesia department chairs. Clinical positions range from a medical director to a section chief, an assistant chief, chief in the CRNA realm, as well as anesthesiology for MDs. Subspecialties in perioperative management and pain management. There are also many roles that really combine clinical and non-clinical practice in terms of chief medical officer positions and vice president positions in medical or clinical affairs. Over the last 10 years, we've also seen a significant surge for the need of the clinical expertise, and in particular anesthesia expertise, in venture capital, private equity, professional service firm, and even as legal experts. Continually educate yourself on what's happening and new trends in the marketplace. Next slide, please. We pulled some current statistics to give you a sense of overall leadership positions. This data is focused on MD. The numbers are from Medical Marketing Service, and our data is as current as December of 2012. Based on the data that we have, we see that there are approximately 39 head positions representing approximately the 6,500 hospitals in the U.S. It's notable that the highest number of chiefs are in states with the highest population and obviously number of facilities, with a heavy concentration on the eastern seaboard. There are lower numbers of these positions in states with rural areas, notably states that have opted out of supervision of CRNAs, and those states are including but not limited to Texas, Florida, West Virginia, and throughout the Mid-Atlantic. Virginia is the only exception in this area due to a lower average number of anesthetizing locations, sorry about that, than neighboring North Carolina and Maryland. In some of the statistics, the position may reflect, again, not just a chief, but also a director of surgical services or medical director title. Next slide, please. Thank you to Dr. Martin. We also took a look at gas work, and we noted that just now, and obviously this data is always fluid, there's 16 chief opportunities online. Chief of MD, about 10, and 6 for chief CRNAs. And you can take a look at all the states of opportunity. Also, always take a look at other sites. Where do we find these opportunities? I think there's a lot in networking events and workshops, resources, and many, many hospital associations. To name a few, the DaVita Physician Leadership just held its annual meeting in February. SSM Healthcare Leadership Conference is happening in Texas in May. The Harvard Medical School, which is a great program, they have a Leadership for Physician Executives seminar. The Levinston Institute has an accountability leadership for their healthcare team. And always there's something with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The resources online are obviously gas work, our website, somniainc.com/careers, hospital websites and the related link, medical associations, and various sites including, but definitely not limited to, LinkedIn, the MGMA, which is an important one, ASA, ANA, and AHA. There are also many state hospital associations, including Ohio, Connecticut, California, Washington, continuing education programs in Florida and Texas, and the American College of Physician Executives also has multiple programs, including the Leadership Development Program and the ACPE Fall Institute. Next slide. I think in closing, I would say that leadership is key to leading to change in behavior and for the better. And another quote would just be to say the leaders of great groups give them what they need, remove obstacles, and always promote creativity. I think we've referenced that a couple of times throughout our presentations, and I think it's very important and true that leaders do empower subordinates, provide them with a sense of purpose and worthiness, embrace input, encourage improvement, and engender change. With that, I would like to thank all of you for your participation and for joining us today, and would like to turn it over to Dr. Martin and the announcement of our CRNA of the Year for 2013.
Thank you to Roy and Marina for your insightful presentations. If you have any questions, please email marketing@somniainc.com. Now it is with great pleasure that we announce the CRNA of the Year award hosted by Somnia Anesthesia. We'd like to thank everyone who submitted a CRNA for consideration. There were many worthy candidates to choose from, which is a testament to the outstanding contributions nurse anesthetists are making in facilities across the country. This year's CRNA of the Year is awarded to a nurse anesthetist who is actively involved in improving the quality of patient care, has superior clinical skills, and exemplifies vigilant service. The winner was selected by a panel of senior-level healthcare clinicians and administrators. Congratulations to Dorothea Connolly from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The Somnia team will contact you shortly to send you your iPad mini. Moving on to question and answer, our first question is for Dr. Winston. Dr. Winston, you said that you led a transition from an MD-only model to an anesthesia care team model with MDs supervising CRNAs. What is the one skill you relied on during that transition?
Well, you know, it took several things, lots of skills, I think, to have it go as smoothly as it did, but I think perseverance would be the one thing I would tell you, because I got a lot of resistance initially, and people really threw up roadblocks, and to be able to overcome those by just continuing to provide excellent care and be there, I think that it really was just perseverance and hard work that got us through, you know. Not to throw another quote out there, but I always like the Albert Einstein where he says success really is a 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And I think a lot of times, particularly in medicine and other positions, we sit around and wait for that inspiration when really it just takes hard work. And I think that's really hard work and perseverance is what got us where we got to.
Well, that sounds reasonable. Now here's another question for Marina. Marina, early in the presentation, it was noted that Somnia's current chiefs each have 20-plus years of experience. I'm an MD with 5 years clinical experience working at a 400-bed facility in California, but I'm interested in exploring leadership options. Do you think it would be better for me to remain at this large facility and accumulate more years of experience, or should I look for a smaller facility where I might be able to get my foot in the door as an anesthesia chief?
I think that question may not have just the right answer. I think that a lot of it depends at the facility where you're currently located, what kind of mentorship and coaching programs they provide, and what the opportunities are on a longer-term career trajectory there. I think with 5 years of experience, it may be challenging to find a role as a lead unless it's in a smaller environment. And you may want to get more sea legs behind you in terms of both clinical and leadership skills before going for a leadership position with 5 years of clinical experience. And always get feedback. You may be the person that's ready, and always know what's happening in the market. And if not this year, there's always the next year and the year after that.
Well, that sounds good. I'm having trouble finding the questions for some reason. Could you send it again? Let's see.
You know what? I think I'm seeing a question, and Roy, maybe I'll give you this one.
Okay.
How does an anesthesia department create true organizational leadership opportunities for CRNAs, either as a key representative of the anesthesia department or as a department head?
Well, I think that you know, in my facility, I have one CRNA that does serve as the chief CRNA, and she really manages the minute-to-minute OR schedule and does the assignments for each day. And you know, we do that part and parcel. Other people have input into it, but really that's her responsibility, and she also does the monthly schedule and so on. But I also have several CRNAs who've stepped up to head areas. I have one CRNA who does a lot of pediatrics, and she takes care of everything from organizing all our pediatric carts and supplies to dealing with some of the issues that come up. And when there's meetings, having the CRNAs attend the meetings in the various staff departments, I think getting a presence, showing clinical expertise and strength in an area, and creating that presence in the environment when you're out of the operating room is how that all begins. And I think that you know, I trained in a program where we had a CRNA. He was actually the ex-chief CRNA of the Air Force, Sam Apollo. He basically ran the clinical operations day to day, and that was at the University of Florida. So I'm used to having CRNAs in those roles, and I think they do an extremely good job of it.
Okay. Dr. Winston, we have another question for you. How do you educate a staff on anesthesia issues so that they all react and think similar?
Well, you know, I think that you have to do problem-based learning and simulations at times. We in our situation when we took over, we had a lot of issues where we had a lot of cancellations for cardiac consultations on patients. And there was anesthesia shopping where, they knew that Dr. X would call a lot of consults and Dr. Y wouldn't, so they tried to get the patients to Dr. Y to get them through. So I think having it be consistent, and it's no different than what children try to do with parents at times, but I think you have to have consistency, and you have to, across the board, discuss the issues at meetings and so on with your staff so that you can all agree. And, like I said, it's not about everybody having their own opinion, and I think, medicine 25, 30, 40 years ago was much more of an art, and it's now much more of a science. And I think that if you get people together, you can set up certain criteria, and, I'll give you the specific examples of hip fractures. We all know now that you have to treat hip fractures with surgical fixation within a timely fashion. And these patients are going to go to surgery, so sitting there and getting 3-4 days of consults while they sit in the hospital and have a higher chance for an embolic event doesn't do them any good, and ultimately doesn't do you any good because your anesthetic probably isn't really changing that much. So coming together with a policy and a clinical care pathway for these patients where there's consistency, I think is what can help solve those things.
Okay, well we're about out of time, so this is the last question for Roy. What are some of the strategies you have developed for communication and perhaps discipline for problem employees?
Well, I'll tell you that's one of the challenges, and I much rather reward someone's good behavior than discipline their bad behavior. However, it's just as necessary, and I think you have to have very direct conversations, and it's good to have them with more than one person around. I always involve my on-site administrator or my associate chief, and we sit down and discuss it. And I think, just like any counseling session, sometimes the person gets it and sometimes they don't. And then my next step up, when that doesn't work, is I will involve the home office of Somnia and get their HR people involved in being able to counsel somebody. Because really, I think if I have an employee that is having problems, it's my obligation to get them back on the right path, and I feel like I fail if I let them fail. And it's a hard thing to do, but you just got to be direct and have those discussions. Just one of those things.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Thank you again for attending our presentation. We will email you a recording of the presentation in the next few days. Have a good night.